All right, today we're going to talk about VA home loan assumptions. This is a really popular topic because as interest rates have risen, VA home loan assumption looks really attractive to buyers. It allows you to get a substantially lower interest rate than you otherwise normally could get. First off, what is a VA home loan assumption? This just means that a seller has bought a property, they lived in it for a while, they're going to sell it. A VA home loan allows any potential buyer to assume that loan. And because interest rates are now much higher than what they have been in the past, that interest rate looks really attractive. That buyer can now take over that home loan and take advantage of that lower interest rate. However, this is a little bit of a different process. So I'm going to break this down for you from both a buyer perspective and a seller perspective. So from a buyer's perspective, the benefit is pretty straightforward. You might see in the listing notes, seller has a VA loan at 2.75%, which is assumable. So you're thinking, great, I want to get a 2.75% interest rate. I'll just assume that loan. Awesome. However, there are some pretty important showstoppers that you need to be aware of up front. So let's just get these out of the way. The number one thing to realize is that when you are assuming that loan, you're taking over that loan, but that difference between the loan amount that the seller currently owes and the purchase price could be way different. So for example, let's say the seller has a $300,000 loan, but they're selling the home for $500,000. You're gonna have to make up the difference between that $500,000 and the $300,000 loan amount. So you're gonna have to come to the table with $200,000. So that's probably the first question you're gonna need to ask. If there's a huge difference between the purchase price and the loan amount, that could be a no-go for you. The second thing to realize is that you might be pre-approved with a mortgage lender already. That mortgage lender is now out of the picture when it comes to a VA home loan assumption. The mortgage servicer, who the seller is making their payments to, because they hold that loan, they are now in charge of qualifying you. That mortgage servicer is now calling the shots, so you are subject to whatever guidelines that they have. Third, from a timing perspective, I'm hearing that these are taking anywhere from 45 days on the short side to 90 plus days. So if you're in a hurry to settle, this might not be a good fit for you. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's cover kind of the nuts and bolts of the process. To start off, once you have an offer accepted, you're going to then submit your documents to the mortgage servicer who holds the loan on that property. These are probably going to be very similar to the documents you already gave to your original mortgage lender. You're going to need to make sure that you are submitting proof that you have funds available to bridge the gap between the purchase price and the loan balance. So how do you do that? One is good old-fashioned savings. You might be able to get gift funds or maybe get a home equity line. But a word of caution, again, that mortgage servicer, they call the shots. So they might not be okay with you receiving gift funds in order to bridge that gap. It's totally according to their guidelines of what their underwriter is comfortable with. Same thing for a home equity line. You might be able to get a home equity line to bridge that gap, but they might say, we don't like this home equity line if it's not assumable like a VA loan, or maybe the home equity line lender that you're trying to get isn't comfortable being behind a VA assumed loan. Why they wouldn't be is kind of above my pay grade, but these are just circumstances that I've heard that people have kind of run into when they're looking to assume a VA loan. So first, let's assume that you are a veteran with your own entitlement. If you are going to assume that loan, you're probably going to do an SOE or a substitution of entitlement, which just means that the seller used their VA entitlement in order to purchase that home and get that loan. You are going to substitute that entitlement, swap it out with the sellers, they get their entitlement restored, and then your entitlement is used in order to take over that loan. If you have to pay a funding fee, you'll pay a funding fee at that time. If you're exempt from the funding fee, just like a normal VA loan, you're not going to have to pay a funding fee. So let's say that you're not a veteran. A lot of people don't realize that you do not need to be a veteran in order to assume a VA home loan. You don't even have to occupy it as your primary residence. So you can take over that VA loan. However, it's really important for the seller to understand that the entitlement that they have, because you don't have entitlement to swap with theirs, is stuck with that home. So if the seller needs their entitlement in order to buy their next home, or if they're not comfortable having their entitlement wrapped up in a property that you're going to be making payments on, this could be a no-go. All right, so that's from the buyer's perspective. Let's talk about it from the seller's perspective. So if you're a seller, the important things that you can do is do as much prep work as you can, because like I said, this is going to be a little bit of a longer process. So the more prep work you can do, you can cut down on that time frame a little bit. First thing that I would do is call your mortgage servicer and say, hey, I'm interested in offering this as an option. If my buyer wants to do this, what does that process look like? Who are my points of contacts? Do you have a list of documents that are going to be needed in order to get this done? By having that already taken care of up front, if you do get an offer, then you can kind of hit the ground running. Anything that you can get in terms of their guidelines, specifically how the buyer can bridge the gap between the loan amount and the purchase price, I think is very helpful. So I would ask if they allow gift funds from the buyer. I would ask if the buyer has a home equity line, do they have any special requirements on how that home equity line is going to look? I also think that you really need to understand how the substitution of entitlement works, meaning if you have a veteran to veteran, know that your entitlement is going to be swapped out and you're going to have your entitlement restored. But also think about whether if you have a non-veteran come through, if you're comfortable with your entitlement remaining with that property. In general, I would say this is not a good idea. So someone who has not earned that entitlement, you have now put your entitlement at the mercy of whether they're going to continue making payments on that loan. If something happens in the future and they can't make those payments and that home goes into foreclosure, well, guess what? Your entitlement on that property is now lost, even though you sold the property maybe many years ago. When you're submitting the paperwork for the VA home loan assumption, I would also make sure that they understand that you are doing an SOE, a substitution of entitlement. You want to make it very clear that your entitlement is going to come off the property and the buyer's entitlement is going to come on. That's VA home loan assumptions. Let me know if you have any questions.